Hi. Let's see. I want to make sure you can hear me. Uh, Welcome. This is our fourth session of the Jefferson lectures. I'll be starting today at slide 350. I have a total of 1,240 slides, and that's an average of about 117 a week, which means I can have about 7.6 weeks left. We've got 3 weeks this quarter, counting today, and I think I signed up for 5 for winter quarter, so we're in good shape here. So a little bit of math for us all. Last week, there was a question about Jefferson's ancestry, and I looked it up, and it was very interesting. And in the past, talking about presidents, I've had a slide or two about the ancestry of the First Lady and maybe a little something on a president or something his father did. But this has been very interesting. I'm kind of sorry I haven't been doing more slides on the ancestry of some of these presidents and especially in this day and age when so many people are interested in their ancestry, and especially among people in the age group I'm in and that this audience is in. It's when you tend to get interested in ancestry. So thanks to the woman who asked this question last week. Let's take a look at Jefferson's ancestry. First, we're going to look at his paternal side. That's his father. And there's little evidence about where they came from. There's lots of oral tradition, word of mouth stuff. Some of it may be false. You never know about things that have been handed down from one generation to another. So let's take a look at what some of this paternal stuff is. First of all, it's that Jefferson's father's side of the family came from Wales in England. You can see here is a black arrow pointing to the section known as Wales. It's most famous for the future king of England is called the Prince of Wales, or that's been the tradition. And you can see that Wales is this section of London that's on the Irish Sea and looks across the sea at Ireland itself, southwest part of England. Jefferson's family oral tradition says they came from the Snowdonia area, and that's in the north of Wales. And you can see there's a Snowdonia National Park. That's very good size national park in England. Snowdonia is where this gentleman, Lord Snowdon, that's the title that he was given by Queen Elizabeth when he married Queen Elizabeth's sister, Margaret. His real name is Anthony Armstrong Jones. And there's a picture of him later in life and a picture of him at his wedding to Princess Margaret. I live near Maplewood Mall. Maplewood Mall did a exhibition of Anthony Armstrong Jones photography. He was a professional photographer and maintained that throughout his marriage also. So anyway, I got to see a show of quite a bit of his photographic work many years ago. I'd say it was back in the 80s, 1980s maybe. Maplewood Mall, I think, was built like early 70s. So anyway, the term for people from this area is they are Snowdons. Jefferson's family said they were from northern Wales, which is the Snowdonia area. And here you can see just the area called Wales, and the north part of it in pink and red is the area that is called Snowdonia. The people in that area throughout history have been farmers, or they have been small business people, small merchants. So that, assuming this verbal history is correct, Jefferson's paternal side would have probably been involved in farming or small businesses. There is a coat of arms for this area of North Wales. It's pictured here. Jefferson, because of the oral tradition and having knowledge of this coat of arms, actually used it in the United States, but he had personal doubts about whether or not the stories were accurate. The coat of arms is applies to him, etc. Welsh is an interesting place too. I mean, you think, okay, it's England, they speak English. Yeah, well, take a look at some of these words. It's pretty incredible. And you can see the meaning of each of the words. There's yes, no, thank you. Look near the bottom, those two sorries. I mean, it looks very much like a language that no English-speaking person would understand. Some of the towns in Wales have very, very lengthy names. I mean, like 28 letters. And so anyway, it's interesting. The language is interesting. The separation from the main portion of England, it's the opposite side of the of England from London and some of the larger cities like York. Wales, maybe Jefferson's descended from this kind of a whale. His father settled in Virginia. I've got an arrow pointing to the area there on the James River. And his father called the settlement that he created Snowdon, a pretty good indicator of something he honored or felt was important in his background. So that lends some credence to the fact that Jefferson's paternal side was from the area of Wales and England. Now we'll take a look at his maternal side, his mother's family, and they are super spectacular if you assume owning a lot of land and owning a lot of slaves is a spectacular thing. This is Jefferson's mother, Jane Randolph Jefferson. The big deal here is Randolph. It's a huge name in the history of what would become the United States and what was then the United States. It's the Randolph family. The maternal family came here 1672, so just roughly 50 years after European settlement in the Americas, or at least permanent settlement. There was a settlement of Vikings in Canada as early as about 996. It was discovered by 1002 Vikings had built longhouses in Newfoundland. But 1672 for present-day United States is when Jefferson's maternal side came here. And they made a lot of money on tobacco. Here's a dried tobacco leaf. It's green when you harvest it. You let it hang and it dries brown. And of course, it's used for smoking pipes, mostly in this day and age. And They were growers of this tobacco. Jefferson's maternal side were, and they were merchants of it. They would sell it also. Another important thing that happened to this family was an economic downturn, and it was due to a rebellion that took place in 1676 in what today is the state of Virginia. And it's known as the Bacon Rebellion. The man pictured here is Nathaniel Bacon. He was the leader of this rebellion. It was a popular uprising, and it was against British authorities. Bacon and his cohorts wanted more control for themselves on the land they were living in, not from some country far across an ocean. Historians generally say that this was a precursor to the American Revolution. Same sort of goals, even though it's 100 years exactly before the American Revolution. Bacon welcomed into his forces slaves that had escaped and wanted to take part in this rebellion. And also, he welcomed indentured servants. Those are people, basically they're slaves, but for a fixed period of time. And usually they were European white folks. And a business would, in the present day United States, would in Europe say, we will pay your fare to the United States. But in exchange for that, you have to work for us for no pay for 7 years. Then you'll be free to go find a job of your own for pay. We will feed you, we will house you. The constitutional amendment that abolished slavery also abolished indentured servitude. The group, even though they allowed in to the Bacon Rebellion slaves and indentured servants, were very anti-Native American. They wanted the land. They wanted the Native Americans moved out. Native Americans were not welcome in the Bacon Rebellion. The graphic here shows the burning of Jamestown, Virginia, which was one of the major wins for the Bacon revolutionaries in 1676. The Randolph settled primarily at Turkey Island, which is on the James River. You can see where the James River flows into the Atlantic Ocean. You can see here how it widens tremendously, just as most rivers do. And at the peak of that widening is where one of the Randolph relatives of Jefferson settled, and it's known as Turkey Island. Here's a close-up of it. Here's the James River. You can see lots of twists and turns here, and again here. And here is Turkey Island, and that's where the Randolph family settled. And then you can see just as the river flows out of the Turkey Island area, that's where it begins to widen tremendously as it meets much more level ground and flows into the Atlantic Ocean. William Randolph was this first relative that came to the present-day United States, present-day state of Virginia, and owned thousands of acres on this island. William Randolph, now the settler, the original immigrant, his granddaughter was Jane Randolph Jefferson, Thomas Jefferson's mother. Here's another portrait of her. So Jefferson was a fourth generation person in the British colonies. Edmund Randolph was a second cousin to Thomas Jefferson. They were contemporaries. Another descendant from Jefferson's original descendant, William Randolph. And Edmund Randolph, like Thomas Jefferson, was a founding father. He was the 7th governor of the state of Virginia and a Virginia delegate to the Constitutional Convention when we wanted to get rid of the Articles of Confederation and create a different government in 1789 is when it happened. But in 1787, there was a meeting where the Constitution of the United States was written. And Edmund Randolph was a member of that Constitutional Convention. Interesting thing about the term founding father, these are people, a lot of them that, generally we've never heard of, but they are people that were involved in the founding of the United States. They were involved in wanting independence. They were then involved in the creation of the U.S. Constitution, etc. A lot of historians wondered, where's that term founding father? Where'd that come from? So they started investigating the writings of a lot of these people who were considered to be founding fathers and couldn't find the term anywhere. So they started looking at papers of famous people throughout the 1800s, still coming up with nothing. The first thing that they found was a speech given in the early 1920s by President Warren Harding, and he uses the term founding fathers. So the term, at least according to written records, is just 100 years old. Declaration of Independence. This was a big event in the life of Thomas Jefferson. He was involved in the writing of it. As a matter of fact, he was the main writer. He wrote the Declaration, but he had 4 other people helping him. The Declaration of Independence, a bunch of people met together and said, hey, we got to do this. And they created a committee that ended up writing the Declaration. We'll talk about them in the next slide. But independence was not, from England, was not a majority opinion throughout the colonies. Only about 1/3 of the people supported the American Revolution. That's 1/3 of the people who lived in the colonies. Another 1/3 really didn't care. And the final 1/3 were loyalists. Those were people that said, no, we need to stay with England. We support the king, we support Parliament, etc. Many of them fled into Canada during the American Revolution, or what I like to call the War for Independence. It really wasn't a revolution. People did not rise up against their leaders. It was really the leading economic class of the colonies wanting more trade rights with the leading economic class of Britain. On the Declaration of Independence Committee was John Adams, who was from the colony of Massachusetts. He lived near the Boston area. Roger Sherman of Connecticut, Benjamin Franklin of Pennsylvania, Robert Livingston of New York, and Thomas Jefferson of Virginia. What's interesting about this is 4 of the 5 people on this committee were from non-slave states, northern states. Only Thomas Jefferson was from Virginia. Here's a close-up of the painting that we saw here on the previous page. And it shows these 5 men, 3 of whom are generally known to all Americans, but 2 of whom are, who are those guys? They're from left to right. There's Adams, Sherman, Livingston, and then Jefferson and Franklin. The Lee resolution was an important aspect of the Declaration of Independence that was introduced at the convention. This is a picture of Richard Henry Lee, and he introduced this at the Second Continental Congress, where independence was approved. And basically what this resolution by Richard Henry Lee states is that the colonies should be declared to be independent from Britain. And it passed on July 2nd of 1776. A lot of people say, why do we celebrate it on July 4th? Some people say that's when it was first signed. Other people say, well, there were a lot of changes made, and there were. So it passed, but then in the next 2 days, there were lots of deletions. Most famous thing about Richard Henry Lee and the Lee Resolution, his son was Robert E. Lee, the most famous of the Confederate generals. So 3 major changes were made before the final passage of the Declaration of Independence on July 4th of 1776. First, lots of stuff that was in the document was removed. And the next 2 items that we're going to talk about is what was removed. But the 3 major changes, you got a fourth of the document that people had approved on July 2nd being revised by July 4th. All items critical of King George III of England were cut from the Declaration in that 2-day period. Leave the king alone. You know, we don't like him. We don't like monarchies, but this is also a problem with Parliament. And it might reflect very unusually negative on us to say we want independence and the king is a turd. Third item, England was an anti-slavery place. They were slowly getting rid of slavery. There were items in the Declaration of Independence that were critical of England's anti-slavery stance, and all of those items that were critical of slavery were removed from the Declaration of Independence. Okay, now we declare our independence. Send the documents to England. They know we're now independent. We wait for them to arrive with even more troops. They had troops stationed throughout the colonies anyway, but now what's going to happen? Well, we set up a government, and it's called a confederacy. Now, this is not the Southern Confederacy of the Civil War. That term confederacy really is talking about a loose-knit association between governmental groups, such as 13 colonies. They now become 13 states, but there really isn't much of a federal government. It's confederacies are states' rights organizations, which is what the Civil War Confederacy of the South wanted. Hey, we can approve slavery at our local level if local levels have the power. We're opposed to strong federal governments. And that's what the United States was. Basically, you can say it started as early as 1774, but the Declaration of Independence was 1776. And the United States then, until 1789, with the adoption of the Constitution, was a confederacy. So 1776 to 1789, we got this loose-knit group of states, and they're pictured here. Now you can look up here in the north, and you can see that Vermont, located here, is not a state yet, nor is Maine, located here. And everything that's in color along here, these are the 13 colonies. They become the 13 states of the United States Confederacy with a weak federal government. I'm going to talk about some of the things Jefferson did during the Confederacy. And there's a total of 6 things that were of significance that he did during this 13-year period. He set an exchange rate for foreign currency. You know, people come here from Spain and Germany and England. They'd come here from Jamaica and other places that had been settled in the Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean area. And nobody knew what their money was or how compared to US money. And so Jefferson said, we need exchange rates. We're going to say that your money is worth so many dollars. One of your things is worth 1.5 of our things, whatever it might be. So foreign exchange rates were set by Jefferson. The hope was this would increase trade for the new United States Confederacy, and that it would make people coming into the country and setting up businesses, and you know, the economic aspect would be improved dramatically. Also, Jefferson said, we need a currency that's a 10-based system. We didn't have that yet. More on what the British system was like on the next slide. But here you got $1, and then there's a $10 bill and a $100 bill. That's times 10 times 10, 1,000 times 10, and on and on and on. 10 to the 8th power, you get to the 100 millions. So a 10-based system. Much of the world was operating on a 12-base system. The reason was the ancients in Egypt and Greece and other countries, the Middle East in particular, did a lot of astronomical observing. It was naked eye stuff. But they said there's a total of 66 constellations. Now the sun moves across the sky in a certain pattern, and that pattern causes the sun to pass through 12 constellations. So people thought 12 was the magic number. Consequently, we've got 12 people on a jury, for instance. And that you can find that number 12 still in a whole lot of different policies in a variety of countries. But Jefferson said currency needs to be 10-based. There's 10 cents in a dime, there's 10 dimes in a dollar, there's 100 cents in a dollar. It's a 10-based system. Let's take a look at the British system of money. 2 farthings equal a half pence. 4 farthings equal 1 pence. 12 pence equal a shilling. 5 shillings equal a crown, and 4 crowns equal a pound. See, nothing 10-based about that. As a matter of fact, unless you're familiar with it, it's very confusing. How many farthings in a crown? Well, I can't go, that'd be 5 times 10, because it's 5 times down the list here. But it's 2, 4, there's the magic number 12, 5, and 4. The British went to a 10-base system. 15 February of 1971, so just a bit over 50 years ago. He wanted to establish a United States government So during the Confederacy, Jefferson was talking about independence and running our own country economically. And this was one of his major concerns in the Confederate Congress. 4, Western territories. These are actually were called Northwest territories. You can see it includes the 5 states of Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, down here, Michigan, and Wisconsin. And this is part of Michigan up here. And it includes all of those 5 states and a major portion of Minnesota, everything east of the Mississippi River and almost everything north of the Mississippi River. So Jefferson wanted to divide it into 9 different states. He wanted Virginia to be the biggest place, population and size-wise. And so, he said, if we make 9 states out of this, that'll be fine. Well, we ended up making 5 states out of it. Virginia was still very large. Here's Virginia. Here's West Virginia. Now, West Virginia didn't become a separate state till 1863. And that was the middle of the Civil War. And it's because people in that area of Virginia, there was a lot of anti-slavery sentiment. So you can see here, Virginia was much larger. It included all of this area up in here, not just this. He wanted slavery banned in those Western territories. That it never happened. Jefferson actually opposed the ban, but he thought he could get a lot more support for westward movement and expansion if slavery were banned in those Western territories, but not so. The Land Ordinance of 1784 was another and final major involvement of Jefferson during the United States Confederacy period. Here you can see this is Virginia, a part of Virginia. They were claiming parts of Ohio, southern part of Ohio down here. And Jefferson said, we need to give up that claim. It was an attempt to expand Virginia and give more territory to Jefferson's home state, also a slave state. Further, people had different ideas about how to expand the states, what to do with the land we were acquiring further west. And they said, maybe what we ought to do is just expand the present states further westward. I got a bigger picture of this thing on the next slide, but here you can see the state of Virginia in Jefferson's time. You can see there's quite a peninsula that today is a part of West Virginia that rides northward here. This is all West Virginia nowadays, this part. But this is what Virginia looked like when Jefferson was living there. Now, Jefferson, of course, wanted lots of power for the state of Virginia. So let's draw these lines from the present 13 colonies, and we'll just draw them westward all the way to the Pacific Ocean, and that'll still be the state of Virginia all the way over there. Now see the state of Virginia, here it is, but it included West Virginia, this part, and it went, remember that little peninsula went all the way up? Well, you draw a line to the north end of Virginia and to the south end of Virginia, you got a huge space here going all the way over to the Pacific Ocean. Whereas North Carolina, there's its northern border, there's its southern border. They get very little. Pennsylvania, the same. that chunk of Virginia, that panhandle area, that cuts off a lot of the Pennsylvania territory. Then look at the places where there's going to be nothing. Maryland gets nothing. Delaware, New Jersey, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut. They have other colonies that are in the way of their westward expansion. Well, we ended up not going with that plan. United States Confederacy. Interesting thing about it is, who was the first president of the United States? George Washington. Oh, yeah? There were lots of presidents of the Confederacy from 1774, when the First Continental Congress began, not supported by the British, all the way up to 1779. So let's take a look at some of these guys and see if we've ever heard of any of them. Here's Peyton Randolph. There's that famous Randolph name. That's who Jefferson is descended from on his maternal side. And you can see he served for 47 days as first president of the United States Confederacy. Then Henry Middleton, he only got 4 days. Then back to Peyton Randolph for 14 more days. Then finally they get settled down. This might happen to the U.S. House of Representatives here any day now, but who knows? At any rate, you can see they were back and forth with pretty short terms there first. John Hancock, famous name. Every school child knows the name. Biggest signature on the Declaration of Independence. He said, I signed my name really large like that so that George III could read it without putting his glasses on. And John Hancock then serves 1775 to 1777, a total of 2 years and 158 days. Then Henry Laurens, a year and 38 days. There are 5 presidents of the United States Confederacy, and one of them that most of us have ever heard of. Now there's more of these guys. John Jay, he serves 292 days. John Jay became very famous, founding father, as all these guys were, and he became the first Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court. Then Samuel Huntington, 1 year, 285 days. Thomas McKean, 118 days. John Hanson, finally a Scandinavian, gets to be president of the Confederacy, 364 days. Elias Boudinot, 364 days. Thomas Mifflin, 213 days. Then Richard Henry Lee. This is the father of Robert E. Lee. We talked about him earlier. 339 days he served. John Hancock again. Here we are, 10 years later, and Hancock becomes president again. And he does a 194-day term during this period of time. So you can also see the presidency. I mean, it's not like every year we're going to elect somebody. They fall in and out of office like speakers of the House did or do to this day. Nathaniel Gorham, 241 days. Arthur Sinclair, 275. And Cyrus Griffin, 298 days. So there's a list. That is 16 individuals over a 15-year period that served as presidents of the Confederate States of the U.S. Back to Jefferson. Jefferson becomes a minister to France. This is like, it's kind of like a level below an ambassador. So you're a major player, but you're not the appointed and Senate approved ambassador. And this was a 4-year period, 1785 to 1789, the last basically 4 to 5 years of the United States Confederacy. In 1789, the Constitution is approved by a majority, vast majority of states. It needed the approval of 9 of the 13, and we become a different kind of government. Here's a map of France. Here's the English Channel. You can see it's across from France. The invasion of Normandy, this area right here, during World War II occurred across the English Channel at this way. The Germans thought it would be here because that's the narrow spot. But to fool them, the United States said, we'll take a long route. And the Germans had their troops all lined up here, and we invade down here. Cherbourg, this town right here, becomes the major port that is conquered by the U.S. within a couple of weeks after the invasion of Normandy. But Jefferson was in Paris, right here, the capital city. He was a diplomat, and that's where he did business with the French government. Excuse me. Minister to France. What's his purpose there? Well, already in France were Benjamin Franklin and John Adams, who are seated here, and Jefferson is standing. And their purpose was to negotiate treaties with countries throughout Europe, not just France. And these treaties would involve trade with the United States. So the United States is basically trying to increase its economic status with European countries. Franklin, by the way, Franklin was the ambassador. Adams and Jefferson were ministers. Now here's the Constitutional Convention. Jefferson is a minister in France, and the Constitutional Convention back in the United States, to change us from a confederacy to a constitutional system, begins to have meetings. What's Jefferson going to do about that? Well, it's 1787 when they meet, and it is ratified in 1789. Those 2 years, Jefferson's in France during that time. Had no part in it. And he didn't want any part in it. In order to get the U.S. Constitution passed, 3 men, all founding fathers, started to write individual articles that were then published in newspapers across the U.S. And these articles were full of reasons why we should adopt this Constitution. And they were written by John Jay, James Madison, and Alexander Hamilton. And there were a total of 85 of them. They are now published as a book, have been for a couple of 100 years. There's John Jay on the left, James Madison in the middle, and Alexander Hamilton on the right. John Jay wrote 5 of these papers. Madison wrote 29, and Alexander Hamilton wrote 51 of these Federalist papers. So Hamilton was the major author, writing 51 of the 85 papers. 5, 29, and 51, as you see here. The thing that political scientists and historians together say, the 2 major papers that were written are number 10 and number 52. And in number 10, it is argued that the majority rule does not count when it comes to rights. In other words, a majority of people cannot take rights away from an individual even, let alone a minority group of people. Rights are something everybody gets. Majority rule, such as in an election, doesn't count when it comes to rights. Then the argument is made that we need a strong federal government. It can do a whole lot more than a loose-knit group of states. You got 13 colonies, all of them wanting trade agreements with European countries, and it gets to be a staggering amount of confusion. And with a federal government, we can make these agreements for everyone all at once. And factions will not be a problem. Factions was the term used for political parties. And most of these founding fathers were opposed to the development of political parties, groups that would have different concepts of, how the government should be run. And of course, England had several of these, and that's what they were trying to avoid. And today, the argument is, well, even with a 2-party system, it's better than having 8 parties, all of them with a reasonable amount of power. So factions, they'll never happen in the United States, is the argument that was being made here, because that was a concern of people. We're not going to have these political parties. Well, they got that wrong. And then paper number 52, it outlines in the House of Representatives, what do you have to be to get elected to the House of Representatives? Are there some standards that should be set? And one of the standards that they set is it'll be a 2-year limit. So those are the 2 biggies. You can go online and read these things free of charge. 10 and 52 is where historians and political scientists tend to focus people. Read those, they're the most important ones. But welcome to read all of them, of course. If Jefferson had been in the United States during the Constitutional Convention and during the writing of the Federalist Papers, and 2 years later, finally, 9 of the 13 states having approved the new Constitution, if he'd have been here for that 2-year period, he would not have taken part in any of it. He was opposed to a strong federal government. A strong federal government, why, that would mean the end of slavery. And Jefferson was a major slave holder. So he would not have attended the Constitutional Convention. He would have argued against it. No thanks to a strong federal government. Great opposition to that. And again, the issue for most of the people opposed to a strong federal government was what would happen to slavery. And of course, you had all these northern states. They were free states. Many of them were very large states: Pennsylvania, New York. Pennsylvania loaded with Quakers who were anti-slavery as a group. And the very large populations in a couple of these northern states cast a lot of fear for Southerners who were slave owners. Where did Jefferson live in France? This is a modern view. In the background here, you can see skyscrapers of the Champs-Élysées. This is a main highway in Paris, and that's where Jefferson lived. This is what it looks like today. This is the hotel that Jefferson lived in, 92 Champs-Élysées. It was demolished in 1842. Here's a picture of it, what it looked like in Jefferson's day. And you can see horse-drawn carriages waiting outside. And you can see it's a 3-story building. Jefferson really supported a lot of what went on in France. He loved France. He wanted to talk to the nobility. So he had extra rooms that he kept open at the hotel so the nobility could come into Paris or come to that part of Paris if they were already there and have a place to stay and talk to Jefferson, and he could make important contacts. And of course, this became significant during the French Revolution in the 1790s. There is a plaque at the site where this hotel was located, and it states, "In this place resided Thomas Jefferson." Then they tell us about Jefferson, Minister of the United States to France, 1785 to 89, President of the United States, 1801 to 1809, author of the American Declaration of Independence against England. The French loved this. England and France were big-time enemies, and so anybody that could be keeping England occupied thousands of miles away in a whole nother area, that was great for France. And he was founder of the University of Virginia, is the last accolade on this plaque at the hotel where Jefferson lived in Paris during his ministry there. This is the Arc de Triomphe that wasn't built until the Napoleonic era. It did not exist when Jefferson lived in Paris. So there were some very famous things in Paris that Jefferson never saw. And of course, it was a century after he left before the Eiffel Tower was built. Another relationship of Jefferson's, we're talking physical stuff here. This is not Sally Hemings. This is somebody else. This is Jefferson's wife, name is Martha. She died in 1782. And Jefferson is in France as a minister, 1785 to 89. So he is not married after 1782. And his wife made him promise never to marry again. They had children. I talked about this earlier. And she, in the family she was raised in, there was her, and she had some siblings, and their mother died when they were young. The father remarried, and he remarried twice. And these stepmothers were horrible. So Martha Jefferson was concerned that her children with Thomas, she was very concerned that they not have stepmothers. So she made Jefferson promise, don't get remarried. Well, in France, he was first an assistant to Ben Franklin, the ambassador. Franklin resigned, and Jefferson became the ambassador in France then. So he was soon meeting with lots of people of substance. He wasn't somebody that Franklin was telling him what to do. Could you write up thus and such and so on? And Jefferson was the guy meeting with all the dignitaries. And Jefferson was now a part of this crowd, meeting in big ballrooms and seeing people of tremendous substance. And that's how he developed this relationship in France. John Trumbull was a United States person, but living in France, and he was an artist there. So he and Jefferson got acquainted, and Trumbull had gotten acquainted with an English couple who had come to stay in Paris for 6 weeks, just extended vacation, and their names were Richard and Maria Causeway, a married couple, and they were both artists, as was Trumbull. Here is John Trumbull. This is a self-portrait of him. Lots of artists would go to European countries, France in particular, just found that they had better relationships there and greater acceptance for their artwork. This is Richard Causeway, a self-portrait who became a part of Jefferson's group, Trumbull, Richard Causeway. He was a miniature artist. What that means is you do little tiny paintings of people. So this might be like the size of a 50-cent piece, or a quarter even. And you'd wear it around your neck, and it'd be a person of significance in your life. And it would have a door on it that you could open and show people, this is my husband, or this is my father, or this is my mother, or whatever. Both of these miniatures that you see here were painted by Richard Causeway. And you can see the loop at the top of each of them. A chain would fit through there, and you'd wear this around your neck. This is Maria Causeway. That's a self-portrait of her at age 21. And she was married to Richard Causeway. So we now have the Causeways, John Trumbull, and Jefferson, forming a group of people who would socialize together. This is a painting, drawing of Maria Causeway by her husband, Richard. Causeways, Trumbull, Jefferson. Okay, the day they all met together for the first time ever, they decided, let's go to the outskirts of Paris, or outside of Paris. There's a nice restaurant there. They had a nice leisurely dinner, and then they said, okay, back to Paris, and let's sit and watch the fireworks. The fireworks were a regular occurrence in Paris. So that was the day that all four of these people got together and started celebrating together. There's been a movie made about this relationship. It ends up being Jefferson with Maria Causeway. And movie's called Jefferson in Paris, 1995 movie. And you can see here, Thomas Jefferson is played by Nick Nolte. Greta Sachi plays Maria Causeway. This is also during the time period when Jefferson meets Sally Hemings. and begins a relationship with her. And in this movie, she's named, or the actress is Thaddeus Newton. So Jefferson gets together with the Causeways and with John Trumbull. They have many meetings, lots of great conversation. Richard Causeway, the husband to Maria, he's a philanderer. He has lots of affairs with other women and with men. And he steps aside from these meetings because it's obvious Maria and Jefferson are have an interest in each other. John Trumbull quits attending these get-togethers, so it ends up becoming simply Maria Causeway and Thomas Jefferson meeting regularly. They had a mutual interest. They both liked architecture and they liked gardens. Paris has lots of great architecture, has lots of formal gardens. They would tour these places together. For instance, here's a piece of architecture, interior design work, the type of place that they would visit through an afternoon. And then afterwards, they would have private hours. The Causeways, okay, they're in Paris, but it was just going to be for 6 weeks. They were then going to return to England, which they do. So it's a short-term relationship between Jefferson and Maria Causeway. Well, Jefferson is playing it big and playing up to Mrs. Causeway. He has an accident trying to be somebody. He was in his mid-40s. She was in her mid-20s. And they were in a garden, taking a look. They love these formal gardens. And there was a little 2-foot fence there. And Jefferson was feeling unusually excited and loved being around Maria Causeway and was going to show off to her. See that fence over there? I'm going to jump over that fence. And so he runs to the fence and jumps, catches 1 foot on the fence, falls to the ground, putting his hands out in front of him, and breaks his wrist, trying to show off. Jefferson was a very accomplished violin player. And this ruined his violin playing for several weeks. There's an interesting portion in the movie that I talked about a couple of slides ago about Jefferson trying to get a bow back in his broken hand again and trying to play the violin. Lots of correspondence between Maria Causeway and Thomas Jefferson. They only had this 6 weeks together, but while they were in Paris, they exchanged some letters. Then when she left Paris and went back to London, they continued to exchange letters. Now, the letters that she would write to Jefferson, since they couldn't see each other all the time and were kind of trying to hide the relationship, although people knew about it, they would write these letters to each other. But Jefferson said, let's keep the letters secret. So Maria Causeway would write to John Trumbull, and she would include a different name, not Trumbull's, not Jefferson's, but would be delivered to Trumbull's address. And when he saw that fictitious name on the letter, he knew that was Maria Causeway writing to Jefferson, and he would deliver the letter to Jefferson. From 1776 to 1790, both while they were in Paris and while she had moved back to London over this 5-year period here, or 4.5 years roughly, of 1786 to 1790. They she wrote to Jefferson 22 times, 22 letters. That's one every 2 months. Jefferson wrote 15 letters to her, and that's a total of 1 letter every 3 months. Here is a copy of a single page of one of those letters. One of Jefferson's letters was 4,000 words in length. That's a very lengthy letter. If you typed it up in 12-point type and you used 8.5 by 11-inch sheets of paper, it would take 8 pages to include 4,000 words. That's about a 13-minute reading time. So this guy was writing some letters of length. The letters continued until 1822. This is just 4 years before Jefferson died in 1826 at the age of 83. Maria Causeway died in 1838 at the age of 77. She was roughly 20 years younger than he was. So 35 years of letter writing. Let me see. They met a year after she and her husband returned to London. She had to come back into Paris for a meeting, and it was a very public meeting, and both of them were at it, and they spoke with each other, but they shared no time alone. Jefferson returns to the United States in 1789. Several times over the next 30-some years, he invites her in letters that he writes to her to come to Monticello. Usually when somebody would come from Europe and stay in the United States for a while, it'd be many months that you'd stay there. I mean, it took you several weeks just to cross the ocean. So you write to somebody and say, come over here, I got extra rooms at Monticello, you can stay here. And, you know, it might have well been a year or longer a visit, but she never acquiesced to that. Maria Causeway, her last years. He died in 1821. She wondered what to do next. Now, she was born in Italy, and she said, I'm going to go back to Italy. She could speak the language, etc. And she did something quite noble for that day, started a school that was just for girls. There weren't a lot of schools just for girls in the 1800s. And she worked there from roughly 1821 to 1838, about a 17-year period, heading up this school. Sorry, this picture just didn't expand well, but it shows that there's nuns who are teachers at the school, and Maria Causeway seated and speaking with many of the young women attending the school. And guess what? This school is still in existence. It's called the Maria Haldfield Causeway School. This is a brochure, the cover of a brochure for the fall quarter of 2022. You can see 23 September to 27 November here. She kept a painting of Jefferson in her bedroom. This is the painting. Wonder who did it. Doesn't look like a lot of the other paintings we see of Jefferson, but eventually the painting was donated to Monticello, and it's on display there if you visit Jefferson's home in Virginia. you can see this painting that Maria Causeway kept in her bedroom. Married couples had separate bedrooms if they were people of wealth in this day and age. And then they would wander back and forth between each other's bedrooms, but you had some sense of privacy by having your own bedroom. Minister to France, this relationship, there are books have been written about it. The love letters between Thomas Jefferson and Maria Causeway here. It's titled Jefferson in Love, and that's still in print. Divided Affections by Carol Burnell. This is a book, and again, you can get either of these books, Jefferson in Love and Divided Affections. And the Jefferson in Love, again, is the letters that they wrote back and forth to each other. Here's another book about the Causeways, not about Jefferson's relationship with Maria, but it's no longer in print, unfortunately. So, but they were people of significance in the art world, and there's a dual biography written of them. This is Sally Hemings. Jefferson, while he was in France, wanted his daughter to be in France also, and the daughter brought a 14-year-old slave along with her. That was Sally Hemings, and that's when the relationship began between Hemings and Jefferson. She was 14, he was 42 when they first got together physically. There's a book on Sally Hemings. It's a novel, but it's based on reality, and it's in print. The relationship between Sally Hemings and Jefferson lasted for nearly a 40-year period, and they had a total of 6 children together. Half of the children were able to pass as white. And one of them, I think it was Eston Hemings was his name, changed his name to Eston Hemings Jefferson, and lived in Wisconsin. The Marquis de Lafayette, let me see, how are we doing? Oh, we have 5 questions. I'm going to do this part on Lafayette, and then let's take a look at the questions that have come in. Lafayette was an important member of the nobility in France, and the French government loaned him as a military leader to the United States during the American Revolution. They wanted to do everything they could to help the US defeat the British, because the French and British were regularly at war and didn't get along with each other. And actually, the defeat at Yorktown, which decided the American Revolution, it's where the British were defeated, was because they couldn't get out of Yorktown. French ships blockaded their retreat there. So Jefferson became familiar with Lafayette during the 5-year period, 1777 to 81, when he was in the United States aiding the revolutionaries against England. Here's a book about Jefferson and Lafayette and their relationship, and deals largely with the war years also. They remained in touch, sent lots of letters back and forth. He outlived Jefferson, and he visited Jefferson, stayed for nearly 2 years with Jefferson, 1824 to 1825. So you can see this is, 40 years almost after the American Revolution. Jefferson aided Lafayette, who now Lafayette was nobility, but he supported the French Revolution. They got rid of the king. And they wrote a declaration in France, much like these Federalist Papers, much like the U.S. Constitution with its first 10 amendments. It dealt with rights, and it was Lafayette that was a major writer of this Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen, which is a big deal in the French government. And Jefferson aided Lafayette in the writing of that document, which is pictured here as a statue with the 17 articles of the Rights of Man, major document of the French Revolution. I think we can get through some of these. Let me tell you about this wheel cipher, and then we'll go to questions. Jefferson was he was a diplomat in France. His letters were being opened regularly, and before they were delivered to him. And he went, what's going on here? So he developed a system of coding the letters that other people sent to him and that he sent to others, known as the wheel cipher. Here's a picture of Jefferson's invention. So there's this French government. This is a display of the French government meeting, and it was obvious that these major elements in the French government were reading Jefferson's mail. So Jefferson invented this coding machine. Here you can see letters, and they all had a wax that would harden, and that's how you would seal the letter. So it would be very obvious if that seal got broken. You knew somebody else had read that letter before it got to you. Jefferson used this wheel cipher while he was in France, and he used it for the rest of his life with many other people also. Here's a picture of it being handheld, and you can see it's made up of a series of wheels, and each wheel can be detached. So the whole thing came apart, and you could reassemble it in a special order. Now, what that means is you line up all the letters of the alphabet on each of those wheels. Let me show you here. You might get a note that said, okay, you've got my wheel cipher. Put it in place with the Z, and then next to the Z, put the second wheel on with the H and the Z together. Then the third wheel with the R together. And you do this for all 26 letters of the alphabet, or 26 wheels on a cipher letter. And then you wouldn't turn the wheels, you'd turn the entire cipher. And you would come to a point where it all made sense. There was a sentence. So here, you've set up one row according to the code, and then as you spin around, you'll find a row that says, the package is in the drop zone. Something like that. Next week, when we start, we'll talk about Jefferson coming back to the United States. Let me stop sharing. There we go. Now we can take a look at these questions.
Yeah, JB. I can read them out to you just so you don't have to worry about
Okay,
popping those
thanks.
open. The first question is from a viewer. It says, "What do you think about Meacham's book on Jefferson?"
I'm not familiar with it, or I mean, sitting here, not enough. So, but I have a copy of it, and it's something that I could comment on next week, but not today.
All
Uh,
right.
Meacham's books are always interesting, however. So, thanks. Go ahead.
Yep. So next question is asking, how do you know that a majority not how do you know not a majority supported the US Revolution? I've read a few revolution books recently, and it sounds like the revolutionists had most of the support of militants and activists. That was one of the colony's strengths. I'm starting to think it likely that a majority wanted independence.
Well, I can look that up for you for next week. Uh, but that it's a commonly held belief. I mean, I've read it many times that that's the one third, one third, one third. They weren't taking polls in those days. Um, I don't know what more I can say about it, I guess, but I'll see if there's something uh, that someone else has to say about it and let you know next week.
So the next one is more of a comment than a question, but it says clearly the term founding father is variably defined. The list that I read most often includes Washington, Adams, Jefferson, Madison, Hamilton, Franklin, and John Jay, the first Chief Justice and one author of the Federalist Papers. I mention this to remind people that the US is not a Christian nation. Only Jay could be remotely considered a Christian. The other six were all deists, a respected belief system in the age of reason. What are your thoughts on that comment?
Yeah, that's correct. As a matter of fact, our first six presidents were not Christians. Um, Four were deists. They believed in God, but not the divinity of Christ. But Jefferson himself, as I've stated in here over the last 4 weeks now that we've done these lectures, Jefferson himself rewrote the New Testament, took out all the miracles, all the statements about the divinity of Christ, etc. It's in print. It's been in print since he first published it, and then the two Adamses, which were among the first six presidents, John Adams and John Quincy Adams, were both Unitarians, as was William Howard Taft, president from 1909 to 1913, was a Unitarian who multiple times stated he did not believe in the divinity of Christ. So, yeah, there's lots of people say it's a Christian nation. Uh, the response that most people give to that remark is no, it's a nation where you can be a Christian. Um, but you need to recognize all beliefs. You're free to believe what you want religiously. Um, it's virtually impossible to run for president today almost without proclaiming that you're a Christian. We've never had a Jew get the nomination of a major political party, meaning Republican or Democrat or Whig party back in the early 1800s, etc. Jacob Javits of New York was a senator, and he ran in primaries. And there have been other Jews too who have run. And some of them, they were raised non-Jews, but um, Barry Goldwater, for instance, had a Jewish background, but was raised as an Episcopalian. And so, yeah, the whole freedom of religion argument is what's significant, I guess, in people running for president. There certainly is a large perspective of the United States that thinks religion matters if you want to be president. So yeah, that as a statement that's correct. She mentions Franklin, who never was a president. So anyway, yep.
Yeah. One of the last ones we have is asking if you're acquainted with Jefferson's letter titled "My Head and My Heart." It reveals his ambivalence regarding his emotions and his morality and his relationship with Marion.
Yeah, I think they meant Maria Causeway, and those are interesting letters, and you can buy a book loaded with them, and yeah, a lot of people that spoke with Jefferson would walk away and say something like he's a wet dishcloth, but he had a stutter, as we talked about earlier, so frequently, he would listen to you and he had comments to make, but he wasn't as outspoken as many people are or were in that day and age. So, and then I see there's another question has popped up. Welsh language derived from? Yeah, I don't know, but I'll look it up. Let's see. Welsh language origin. A part of the situation with languages is people did not travel very far beyond the point where they were born, up until this past century. That was the case. And as a result, languages became very individualized. There wasn't much communication across very short borders, even. Both of my paternal grandparents came here from Denmark in 1903. They lived 10 miles apart in Denmark. And as a child, I would hear my grandparents speaking to each other in Danish. Then they'd start speaking in English, saying, "That's not a Danish word that you just said." And they lived 10 miles apart. But even into the late 1800s, these languages they were very localized. And even though you could travel about, but I'll tell you, anybody speaking that Welsh language today, any person that's an English first language speaker, you would not understand them. So
I think we have time for one more question that just popped in.
Oh yeah.
Which asks, why was there such a frequent switch in the presidents of the Confederacy?
Well, they were associated very closely with the governing body at the national level. So it was like electing a Speaker of the House. We've had speakers of the House that served for 15 years. But that's the reason. These weren't national elections. They were elections of people that were chosen by the state to go to wherever the Congress, the loose-knit Congress of the Confederacy was meeting. And people would step down, people would lose support. It very much was like picking a speaker for the House of Representatives. And the situation that we see today, where we're having difficulty with that. It's unprecedented in U.S. history. There's never been this much difficulty picking a speaker. But it's basically that same process that was going on under the United States Confederacy and picking a president. And the president then presided over the Congress. So, good. See you next week.